Welcome to EJB Talks, Rutgers Blaustein School experts in policy, planning, and health, where we talk with our faculty and staff experts, as well as students, about how the fields of public policy, urban planning, public health, health administration, and public and urban informatics affect your lives. Welcome to EJB Talks. I'm Stuart Shapiro, the Associate Dean of the Faculty at the Blaustein School, and the purpose of this podcast is to talk with my colleagues and our alumni about policy, planning, and health, the interaction between these issues, and how they affect people in New Jersey, the United States, and the world. Over the last couple weeks, we've looked at what lies ahead for the pandemic. Today, we turn to the other related major crisis, the economic recession that we are in. We're bringing back Professor Carl Van Horn, who also directs our Heldrick Center on Workforce Development and has just completed some major surveys on the economy. Welcome back, Carl.
Good to be with you, Stuart.
Let's start by talking about these surveys. Can you tell me what your goal was in fielding them?
Yes, for many years, the Heldrick Center has conducted national random samples of American population about issues relating to work and the economy. And so this time we wanted to go back into the field, obviously, during this particularly difficult time and understand really two things. One, what's the impact of the COVID-driven recession on them and their families? And then what do they want the government to do, if anything, to help them through this difficult period? And then it also enables us to compare some of what they say today versus what we've collected over a 20-year period in other periods of economic boom and bust to see whether their experiences and opinions are different now than they were before.
So I saw the report, which is available on your website now.
Yes, absolutely.
And there was a lot of stuff in there, a lot of interesting stuff, a lot of surprising stuff. But I'd be interested to know what surprised you the most about the results.
Well, I think there were two parts to it. I mean, the first was that I should add we did a pre and post election study also. So in other words, we also have that to compare. And I was expecting that there would be huge changes because of the very partisan nature of all elections, but certainly this one. But it turned out there was actually some consensus, significant consensus, between people who either identify as Republicans or tend to support them, and also those who are Democrats and tend to support Democrats. And that is, one is that they really want the government to intervene in a way that we've never recorded in our 20 years of survey work. So, for example, during the Great Recession, we ask a question, who's responsible for helping unemployed workers? Is it government? Is it the individual, or is it business? And for many years, even during the Great Recession, we got them folks basically split in three. It was a third, a third, a third. This time, half the people said it's really government's primary responsibility, with the other half divided between it's up to the individual and up to the employer. So then we asked them, okay, we can go back and talk about why I think that is, but then we asked them, okay, what should the government do specifically? And on a variety of policy interventions we tested, there was overwhelming support generally, and there was no difference across parties. So the most popular one was infrastructure investments, but there was also a very large, at 95%. Then there was very strong support for financial assistance to small businesses, creating temporary community service jobs, giving people family leave to take care of children or sick relatives, and even providing support to state and local governments to avert layoffs of essential workers. So while our elites and policymakers may be very deeply divided on these issues, when it comes to the public sentiment, there's a lot of consensus. So I'd say I was surprised.
So I wonder if that is a little bit of the Democrats have certainly come out with a unified message on this that the government needs to do more, we need bigger stimulus checks, et cetera, et cetera. Meanwhile, the Republicans have had a somewhat muddled message because of President Trump calling for bigger stimulus checks while conservatives in Congress rebelling against that. It may be that actually that's produced an electorate that does see the need for government help there.
I agree, Stuart. I also think that it's the twin crises. You know, it's both a public health crisis and an economic one, obviously closely related to each other. But when you think about, and we did the second survey, the first one we did before the election, of course, before November. But the second we did up through the second, I think, or third week of December, after it was clear to most people that Biden was going to be the new president. Um, but I think during that period we had, I guess, the second or the third surge of the pandemic, and the unemployment situation continued to deteriorate during that period after the election. So I think it's a crisis that is. I think people understand it perhaps better than they did the Great Recession, which was really a world financial crisis, and for many people, it's really unclear what was going on, right? Whereas this was pretty much right in front of everybody. We had the highest unemployment rate we've had since the Great Depression in April and May, and it was very sudden. And then, of course, it started rising again after the right before and after the election.
So that brings me to what I was surprised by is that given that sort of impact of COVID and that its presence in everyone's lives, I was surprised that people's concern about job security mirrored where they were in 2013. What did you take from that?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that because that's been a constant and one that we've written about at the Helbrick Center a lot, which is basically that Americans feel and have felt this way for quite some time, very insecure in their economic future. For example, one question which actually was asked for many, many decades, not by us, but by the Gallup organization. The question is, do you think the next generation would be better off than yours? And for most of the time up through the Great Recession period or right before that, it was, yeah, it's going to be better. But really, since for almost the last 20 years, we've been getting no, it's not going to be necessarily. I mean, obviously, some people still think it will be, but it's now in negative territory, and I think that relates on terms of the reality, two things. One is most people's incomes against inflation have not increased. Their purchasing power has either been flat or declining. And then related to that, of course, the cost of college has been skyrocketing, right? So the traditional path to greater economic security perhaps was, for many people, was getting a college degree, but now that is receding in the sense it becomes too expensive for many people. The second point is that the number of jobs and disruptions during this period have accelerated, and the recessions have been deeper, right? So we talked about in the early 2000s the jobless recovery. So in other words, you didn't have more jobs coming back, and even though by 2013 the recession had ended officially 3 years ago, the unemployment rate still remained very high. People dropped out of the labor market, what we call prime age workers, and their incomes did not increase against inflation. So I think this underlying malaise, if you will, led to those conclusions.
So the COVID recession, in a sense, has just kind of brought to the forefront of people's minds trends, long-term trends and problems in the economy. Is that a fair way of characterizing it?
Certainly, yeah, certainly for the last 10 to 20 years. If you think about going back to the where there was a great anger towards Wall Street, this anger was really left and right. They expressed it differently, but there people are hurting in all different parts of the country. And by the way, doesn't just hurt Republicans or Democrats. It doesn't just hurt low income people or well educated people. It hurts a lot of people. And so I think there's a general anxiety there. So even in 2018, when we had the lowest unemployment rate in 50 years, we still got fairly high numbers of people expressing anxiety. They were more positive in their outlook, clearly, than they were in 2020. But there was still a lot of anxiety then because of the what we call precariousness of the job market. People just don't know, can they stay in that job? I've got it for now, but am I going to be able to retire? Am I going to be able to stay in that job when there's so many people getting laid off around me? And the insecurity, really, which is pretty widespread. I mean, I often say the only people who feel secure in their jobs probably are federal judges and tenured professors. I'm glad I'm one of them. Privileged to be so. But, there aren't very many other people that feel that way anymore.
Yeah, and you and I both have that fortune to be tenured professors, and we teach in the public policy program here at Blaustein, which of course leads me to ask, what does all this mean for what our priorities should be in public policy at the federal and state level as pertains to joblessness and economic security?
Well, I think if we're to follow both the economics and the public sentiment, it should be to invest deeply in not only recovering quickly so that we don't scar the individuals in the economy, but we also should be investing in the long run to make the economy stronger and to create better jobs for people, right? So, what does that mean? It means being able to work hard, earn a living, and be able to support your family, which clearly many people can't do if they have precarious jobs, if they have gig jobs that can disappear overnight. I mean, think about all the Uber, Lyft drivers who, they were getting by, and now in a period of 6 weeks, most of them lost that opportunity, right? I mean, and so that difficulty really is one that I think needs to be addressed both in the short term so that we don't repeat the same mistakes we made in the Great Recession, which were that the stimulus was too small and it was a one shot. And so what happened also was we had, and this is wishful thinking on my part, but we need to try to find the bipartisan consensus that we had in April and May to get these packages through that, and some version of them that President Biden's proposing. Because if we don't do that, then we're going to be in the same position we were in the Great Recession, meaning a very slow recovery, a lot more people going into poverty, people dropping out of the labor market, and all of this is bad for everyone. Not just the people that drop out, but as you know, Stuart, it means the economy is smaller, we're less productive, and it's really bad for everyone.
Yeah, and the one other thing I'd like to see is, and I think a mistake that was made in the Obama recovery, and there was a lot that was good about the Obama recovery, is that it was too hidden. In other words, people didn't see what the government was doing for them, and that led, I think, to a lack of appreciation, and paved the way for some of what came afterwards there.
No, I think that's right. I mean, if you give people a payroll deduction, for example, which was a lot of the stimulus, it's invisible. It's happens and you have more money in your pocket. But for people that have lots of money, it's really essentially irrelevant. For people who are lower middle class or in poverty, it's helpful, but it's such a small amount they don't really see the benefit. And so, I agree. And that of course is the difference between the way President Roosevelt went about it. Um, he was certain that he wanted things that were visible to people. Hence, the WPA jobs programs that built infrastructure, and I think that's partly why it's so popular because I think people want government to do things they can see and they appreciate that directly benefit them. And so that's why I think we see those being roundly supported by the folks in our most recent survey.
Absolutely. And so now I'll ask you to put your political science hat on for a second. What are the likelihoods we see these types of actions?
Well, I think will some of it will happen. I mean, and I what I mean by that is I think I would bet that infrastructure projects, they were long delayed. Some of our listeners may recall President Trump had infrastructure week, I think 3 or 4 times, and then nothing happened. But that's because there's bipartisan support for that, not just because it's pork barrel for politicians, but it is that, uh, but also because there's a great need in the country for this to remain a competitive nation, and the business community and organized labor are completely on the same page on this. So the coalitions are there to do this. And the last point I'd make is there's nothing better that you can argue for borrowing money than an infrastructure project that's going to last 50 years. Okay, so you can't say we're borrowing. We're actually borrowing to invest in our future, and we're going to pay it off over a period of time. The Tappan Zee Bridge has been there for 80, 70 years or whatever. I may be wrong exactly about that, but it's something like that. So, we'll long have paid off those bonds and that debt to build these big projects, and they'll still be benefiting us. So I think that. I also think I think there's consensus probably around helping small and medium-sized businesses that have been so devastated by this because it's Main Street business. It's part of I think both Republicans and Democrats agree on that. Um, and also, I guess I would say extending unemployment insurance, which I neglected to mention before. I think that isn't as popular, but it remains popular because it is a direct way to help people who, lost a job through no fault of their own. And I think that likely is to be supported. Now, the question is how large they'll be, which maybe is your next question. That's a different story. I mean, that may not be large enough to solve the recovery that I think we need, but I think there'll certainly be significant action on those.
How much of this do you think will be handled or part a recovery partially fueled by the fact that we are starting to get vaccines out? The Biden administration is every day seeming to up its goals in terms of people vaccinated. That's got to be able to make a difference.
It does, but if you listen to Chairman Powell, the Federal Reserve Chair, yesterday, which I did, um, he talked about the uncertainty of how quickly people can be vaccinated, and whether the variants that are coming, as apparently happens all the time, whether they're more deadly to people who become infected, in
Yeah.
addition to being more transmissible, in other words, infecting more people from a given person who's already infected. So, and so therefore he announced that they're going to keep interest rates at near zero for the foreseeable future. So, I mean, I think that those are the continuing uncertainties. Um, Unemployment is going up again. We'll find out next Friday what the actual numbers are, but the unemployment insurance claims are increased. They're up around a million a month now, additional. So we're not out of the woods by any means. So I think the idea that many economists have, all of us hope for, is a V-shaped recovery, not just for the well-off who can work remotely and so on, but for everyone. I think is further receding, and I think that's going to give more urgency to putting some more money into the economy on the part of the government.
Certainly hope you're right. Would you characterize yourself as more or less optimistic than were when we had you on 8 months ago?
I would say I'm more optimistic because of the fact that then we were dealing with essentially an out of control public health crisis, which anybody who was paying attention was not being handled well. Okay. And maybe couldn't be handled well, but nonetheless, it was just devastating. And that was the first surge. Okay, we were talking about it in May, I think it was, and then you also had clearly gridlock, and some of it was between President Trump and his own members of his own party. Some of it was Democrat, Republican, so there was a lot of that. Um, I think that um, I'm more optimistic because you have the leadership in the White House who obviously wants to do this. You have, that is to say, put more money into the recovery. I also think you have more consensus in the business community that that needs to happen than was true back in May. And I think you also have the fact that we don't know how long it will take to actually reach the quote new normal, in which case people will still be holding back. Those who have money to spend, maybe they may be saving it because they don't know what's going to happen next. I think so. The lid, if you will, on the economy hasn't been taken off yet. The uncertainties, but I think they're much better, in my view, than when we had no vaccine and we had no idea how we were going to defeat this public health crisis.
Great. Well, thank you again for coming on. I could ask a dozen more questions, but after 20 minutes or so, we start losing listeners. So I'm going to stop there. Thanks so much, Carl.
Thank you, and good to be with you as always, Stuart.
Also, a big thank you to our production team, Amy Cobb and Karen Olson, as always. We'll be back next week with another talk from another expert at the Blaustein School. Until then, stay safe.